For over 500 years, people believed King Richard III was lost to legend. Then, archaeologists found his bones beneath an ordinary parking lot. An absurd discovery. He was the last English king to die in battle, paraded in disgrace, then buried and forgotten. The world cheered when DNA tests seemed to confirm the skeleton matched. Yet, part of the test did not fit, and that mismatch sparked quiet panic among scientists. In 2025, one breakthrough finally exposes what Richard's grave was hiding, and it changes the story of England's crown forever. So how did a king end up under concrete? And what secret rewrote history? Richard III's end was engineered to erase him from memory. After the bloodbath at Bosworth Field in 1485, his battered body was carried to Leicester, stripped, exposed, and left on public display. The victors wanted every wound visible, a warning to anyone who might dream of Yorkist revenge. No royal funeral, no ceremony. Instead, Richard was buried hastily in the Friars' Church of Greyfriars, a simple grave far from the grandeur of a king's resting place. The humiliation was deliberate, a defeated king reduced to a spectacle, then to a footnote. Not long after, the Reformation swept through England, and the church itself vanished, dissolved, demolished, and built over. Stories spread that his bones were tossed into the River Soar and lost forever. What remained was not a monarch, but a villain's shadow. Shakespeare's play turned Richard into the ultimate hunchback tyrant, cementing the Tudor version of events. For centuries, no one expected his body or his truth to ever be found. Philippa Langley refused to let Richard III's story end in a Leicester parking lot. She spent years hunched over old maps, tracing the vanished lines of Greyfriars Church beneath the city's tangled streets. Where others saw a dead end, Langley saw a pattern. Ancient stones hidden beneath office blocks and asphalt. Her theory was simple but radical. If the friary outline matched the modern cityscape, Richard's grave might sit untouched under a patch of tarmac marked with an R for reserved. Some believed her. University officials dismissed her as a fantasist. Local historians called it a waste of time, and the press rolled their eyes, branding the project a wild goose chase. But Langley pressed on, lobbying, fundraising, and refusing to let the skeptics win. In August 2012, the city council finally granted permission for a dig. The first shovel hit the ground, watched by a handful of archaeologists and one determined screenwriter. The search for a lost king was no longer just a theory. It was a hole in the ground, and anything could be waiting beneath the surface. The grave was too short for the body inside. Whoever dug it had not bothered to make room for a king. The skeleton, labeled simply as Skeleton 1, lay twisted in a shallow pit, arms pinned, spine curved in a dramatic S shape. The bones belonged to a male in his early 30s, Richard III's age at death. 10 separate wounds scarred the remains. 8 were to the skull, each blow evidence of a final, frenzied assault. 2 were instantly fatal, one sword cut at the base of the skull, and a deep puncture through the top, likely from a halberd. This was no clean battlefield death, but a personal, brutal end. The spine told its own story. Severe scoliosis had forced the man's right shoulder higher than his left, matching the rumors that followed Richard III for centuries. Yet the bones showed he was no monstrous hunchback, just a man with a pronounced curve, able to wear armor and ride. Chemical analysis of the teeth and bones revealed a diet rich in seafood and imported wine, luxuries few could afford. Every physical clue, age, wounds, spinal deformity, the signs of privilege, circled back to the last Plantagenet king, but bones alone could only suggest. Proof would require something deeper, hidden in the smallest fragments left behind. Extracting DNA from bones, half a millennium old, is a battle against time itself. In a sterile lab, scientists drilled into a tooth and a femur from skeleton 1, searching for mitochondrial DNA, the genetic thread passed down from mother to child, generation after generation. Richard III had no living children, but his older sister, Anne of York, did. Genealogists traced Anne's female line through 17 generations, a chain linking medieval royalty to the present day. At the end of that chain stood Michael Ibsen, a quiet furniture maker from London, and Wendy Duldig, a retired school teacher in New Zealand. Their DNA became the key. When the lab results came back, the match was perfect, down to a rare haplogroup J, a signature almost impossible to fake. The odds against coincidence were astronomical. On February 4th, 2013, the University of Leicester announced to the world that the bones beneath the parking lot belonged to Richard III beyond reasonable doubt. For a moment, centuries of rumor and legend gave way to scientific certainty. The lost king had a name again. In the lab, the mood flipped from celebration to confusion. After the triumph of the mitochondrial DNA match, scientists turned to the Y-chromosome, the genetic thread passed from father to son, unchanged for generations. The logic was simple. If Richard III and the modern Somerset descendants both traced their male line to Edward III, their Y chromosomes should be identical. Instead, the results were a total mismatch. Not a partial difference, not a distant cousin's drift, but as if the lines had never crossed at all. The term for this is clinical and devastating, a false paternity event. Somewhere in those 19 generations, the official father on the family tree wasn't the biological one. The discovery left the team reeling. Centuries of royal bloodlines, legal claims, and inherited power were suddenly called into question by a few letters in the genetic code. The bones under the parking lot belonged to Richard III, but his royal lineage was suddenly an unanswered riddle. When the DNA results landed on the desks of the research team in 2014, the facts were too big to ignore and too volatile to headline. The Nature Communications paper, meant to seal the triumph of Richard III's rediscovery, instead walked a careful line. It laid out two scenarios. One, that the Y chromosome break happened somewhere down the Somerset line after Richard's time. A minor embarrassment for a noble family, but nothing that would shake the foundations of English history. The other scenario was far more dangerous, a potential scandal. If the break had occurred before Richard III, it would mean the king himself, along with his brother, Edward IV, had no true claim to the throne. That would turn the Wars of the Roses into a fight over a genetic fiction. But the paper stopped short. Lacking the tools to pinpoint the break, the authors presented both options as equally possible. The ambiguity let the world focus on the solved mystery, not the one left simmering beneath the surface. For a decade, the most explosive question in royal history was left open, waiting for science to catch up. In 2025, a new alliance of scientists from Leicester, Harvard, and the Max Planck Institute set out to answer the question that had haunted the Richard III project for a decade. Where exactly did the royal bloodline break? Armed with long-read DNA sequencing and advanced proteomics, the team turned to the Somerset family, direct male line descendants of Edward III. After months of analysis, the results came back with overwhelming clarity. The modern Somerset's Y-chromosome was a 99.9% match to each other and to the Plantagenet signature expected from the male line of Edward III. But the Y-chromosome recovered from Richard III was different, a genetic outlier. The evidence pointed squarely to a single generation. The break had occurred between Richard III's grandfather and his father, Richard, Duke of York. For the first time, the centuries-old question of legitimacy was answered not by rumor or record, but by the code written in bone. Whispers about Cecily Neville and an archer named Blayborn once flickered at the edges of royal history, dismissed as Tudor slander or political mudslinging. Yet the DNA riddle has dragged those old rumors back into the spotlight. If Richard, Duke of York, was not the biological son of his father, then the entire Yorkist claim to the throne collapses. Edward IV, the princes in the Tower, Richard III himself, all would be swept up in a cascade of illegitimacy. Was Cecily a victim of circumstance, or did she gamble with the fate of a dynasty? Did anyone in power suspect, or did they cling to the story they needed? The line between documented fact and centuries of rumor grows thin, and with it, the certainty of what it ever meant to be royal. In the end, the truth is tangled, and the questions refuse to die. Today, science rewrites the oldest royal script. It proves a king's bloodline was a lie, and that centuries of war were fought for an empty throne. In an era obsessed with ancestry, DNA still holds the power to shatter legends. What other truths wait beneath our feet? Share your thoughts below.